Hi everybody, and welcome to my first of two videos about the Pentax H1a, in some markets called the S1a. They were the same camera with a different designation. This is an interchangeable lens SLR. It predates the Spotmatic bodies. It has no meter, shutter speeds of 1/500th with B&T, and a hidden shutter speed of unknown. The viewfinder has magnification of 0.88x, which is pretty small, but pretty good as well for a camera of its age. The viewfinder frame coverage, how much of the frame the viewfinder actually covers, I couldn't find anywhere, but looking through it, I'd say it's probably in the 90 to 92% range. I think on the high side of that, but I'm not 100% positive. It has a Fresnel matte field with central toroid for focusing assistance, and FP and X flash syncs. The FP will sync at different speeds based on the type of bulb, but bulbs like that aren't available anymore, at least not readily, so it's not really useful. But it does sync an X flash, which is the modern electronic flash, and that sync speed is 1/60th of a second, and it's marked on the shutter speed dial by a red X. So the H1a had as its target market entry-level SLR users. When the H1a entered the market, which was in 1962, SLRs were still a very uncommon type of camera. We're coming out of the 50s, and in the 50s, viewfinders and rangefinders were king, and SLRs were these ultra expensive things for rich people and nuts, basically. And so this was an entry-level SLR that was more close to affordable, still not really readily affordable, but closer to it for more people. And it was cameras like the H1a, which were relatively inexpensive and easy to operate, that allowed more people to get into photography, and SLR photography specifically, to improve in general photography as an art form. It has a slower max shutter speed than the H3V, and in basically all ways it's a scaled down H3V. The H3V has the same layout and functions, only the H3V goes up to 1/1000th of a second for the maximum shutter speed. This was produced by the Asahi Optical Company in Japan from '62 until '68. It was preceded by the H1, produced concurrently with the H3 and H3V, and followed by the Spotmatic SP500, which is what this camera eventually evolved into. Alright, so if you have your Pentax H1a, you can take a look at the top of it, and we'll go over the features on the camera. In the second video, we'll talk about how to use these features and what they do and how they affect your photography. Starting on technically the sides, we have the strap lugs, and that's where your camera strap connects to your camera. Over here we have the film rewind knob and the fold-out film rewind lever. Circling it, we have the ASA memo wheel right there. And what this does is allow you to remember what type of film you have. So for instance, the orange numbers are, so all of the numbers are in ASA. ASA and ISO are the same. The white numbers are for black and white. The green numbers are for color outdoor film, and the orange numbers are for color tungsten film. And so that way you would know, okay, I've got 25 ISO indoor tungsten balanced film in my camera. Now with modern white balance on digital cameras, tungsten film isn't as important as it was back when people were doing everything underneath incandescent lighting when inside. Here's the serial number and the model number, prism, and over here we have the cocked shutter indicator. So right now the shutter is not primed to fire, but when you advance the film, it turns orange, indicating that the shutter is ready to fire. This is the shutter speed selector dial, and this black line here is the shutter speed index. I'll relate a story with my H3V. I shot multiple rolls of film thinking that the cocked indicator was the shutter speed index. It's not. I shot a bunch of rolls of film, more than 2 stops overexposed because of it, which is pretty embarrassing. So just make sure that you select the shutter speed, which is next to the black line. This little dent right here next to the T is for the meter, the light meter prism, or the light meter that can attach to the top of this. And then on the light meter, you control the shutter speed through that. And then there's a pin that locks in here so that the light meter's shutter speed dial can rotate this dial. Next to this, the shutter speed dial, we have the shutter release button, and this is the button you push to take a picture. This is the film advance lever, and here is the frame counting window. And this was one of the first SLRs that had an automatically resetting frame count window, which means that when you pop the back open, that automatically goes back to -3 frames so that you don't have to manually reset it and very possibly forget to manually reset it. Here on the camera's front, much simpler interface than modern cameras, but simple is in very many ways good. We have the lens mount here, and this is an M42 lens mount. You might be able to see inside if I adjust the lighting. There is the reflex mirror, and in front of the reflex mirror you can see this paddle, and that flaps forward when the picture is taken to stop the lens down. And we'll see a little bit more about how that works in the second video when we talk about taking the picture with this camera. Here are the FP and X flash PC sockets. On the camera's side right here, we have the film back release switch. So you can pull this up as much as you want. You can pull the film knob up as much as you want. It's not going to open up the back of the camera. The back of the camera is opened up by that. The back of the camera itself doesn't really have anything except the viewfinder, which you can see has some accessory grooves for mounting things like the prism. That's how it locked into place. You could also put an angle finder on, or a diopter adjustment for people who wore glasses so they could take their glasses off to take a picture. Here on the camera's bottom we have 2 things. We have the masking tape is not part of the camera. The former owner's name and identifying information were on it. I figured they might not want that all over the internet. You're welcome, Mr. Vaught. Here is the tripod bushing. That's where you would attach the tripod. And here is the film rewind knob that you use to rewind the film. An interesting touch about the H1as and H3Vs and some of these old pre-Spotmatics is that the film rewind knob has the letter R on it, which you never see, and yeah, you can feel it. It doesn't really do anything. It's just a nifty little design touch. And that's something Pentax did away with in the later versions in the Spotmatics, and after that in perpetuity. And the first time I laid my hands on one of these old cameras that had the R, I thought that's neat. It doesn't serve any real purpose, but it's a neat touch that shows that the Pentax designers and engineers were spending a lot of time really thinking about some of the aesthetic elements of this camera as well as the functional. And here we can see inside the camera. This is the film chamber where you put the film to load it. We have the guide rails. The outer 2 keep the film from moving up and down as it travels through the film plane. The inner 2 work with the pressure plate on the back of the film door to keep the film flat on plane while it's in front of the shutter right here. This is the film tension sprocket that keeps tension on the film so that it also stays flat, and so that it doesn't get pulled back into the cassette by the tension in the film. So the film basically is wound in the cassette, which makes it operate like a spring, like a clock spring. So if it weren't for this tension sprocket right here, the film would slowly be pulled back into the cassette, which would cause you to have overlapping images. And here is the film take-up spool, which when you advance the film take-up lever, rotates the film take-up spool, there we go, and advances the film. On the back of the camera we have the film pressure plate right here, and as you can see there's very little wear on this plate, and so I'm sure this camera was used, but being an entry-level camera it was probably not used as heavily as a professional level camera. And here is a little spring that keeps the film cassette in place and helps again to keep the film aligned on plane. And basically every component of the camera's internal structure is used to keep the film flat, so that the lens focus, so that the film is exactly where the lens focuses the light when the picture is taken. So some notes about the Pentax H1a. This was part of the last generation of Pentax cameras without a light meter. But no light meter means that there are no distractions whatsoever in the viewfinder, and it allows the shooter to focus on composition. And in my experience with my H3V, and I'm ashamed to admit that I've never actually put a roll of film through this camera, my experience with the H3V, which has the same viewfinder, is that it's an absolute joy to take pictures with it. I love taking pictures with my H3V. I've taken it into some very challenging environments for meterless photography. And even though some of my photos have been exposed improperly with it, my composition has typically been stronger than it is with cameras that have digital displays inside the viewfinder. There's nothing to distract me from the image, and there's nothing to distract me from having it look the way that I want it to look. And so old cameras like this are a good learning tool, and a good tool for people who have been taking photos for a long time, because using them puts us back in touch with something photographic, some compositional roots that all of the technology and meters and LCDs and metering systems and focus types takes away from us, because all of that stands between us and the light that's coming in through the lens. And what's important about a photo is the light that's coming in through the lens and the shape that it takes in the finished image. So a couple things not to do with this camera. Don't touch the shutter. You will brick your camera. Do not touch the mirror, because you can desilver it. It's a surface-coated mirror, and if you take the silver off, you won't be able to focus properly. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car, because they'll be damaged by the heat and the cold and the oils in them that keep them operating properly will break down or get into places they shouldn't, and then your camera won't operate properly. Don't store your camera or other or lenses in a plastic bag or box, because moisture will get in there and cause fungus to grow. Don't let your camera get wet. This is definitely not a professional grade camera, and so if water gets inside of it, it will do damage and impair your camera's ability to function. And just remember that your camera is a precision tool, and as long as you take care of it, it will take care of you. Now, I know I just said in my voiceover that I have not actually taken any pictures with this camera, and that's true as of this video's recording. However, since I recorded this video, I've taken this camera out with some film. Here are some shots that I have taken with this actual camera. You might not think too much of the H1a, that it's just another early 60s Pentax, that lacking a light meter makes proper exposure difficult. And you'd be correct on every one of those counts, and you'd be wrong on every one of those counts. Like the old Pentax S and H series cameras, this has a light shutter with a pleasant and unobtrusive sound. Some people will say they sound loud because they sound mechanical, but there's a difference. And the absent light meter doesn't make it hard to use this camera. In fact, the lack of exposure and operational data in the viewfinder makes image composition easier. And this camera, like the other S&H series cameras, has a very large and bright viewfinder, much more so than you would find on most any camera from any maker from the 70s and onward. But because of the interface, and because you have to think about each shot before it's taken, making an exposure mistake becomes simultaneously easier and harder.
Cheever, hey. Cheever, sit. Hey, Cheever.
What I mean is that, at first, you might forget to change the shutter or aperture, but in time, you'll remember to. And then you'll find yourself catching mistakes you otherwise would have made with other cameras. Old meterless cameras like this H1a take great photos and work very well. In fact, if you know your exposure, they will take better photos than newer cameras because the viewfinders aren't jammed with distractions. The backs aren't messed up by digital displays with confusing menus, and the simple light mirror movement and shutter introduce nearly no vibration. And because there's no meter and no automatic settings, you can use any film at any speed. Want to push 400 ISO film to 6400? Just calculate the exposure, and as long as the shutter speed is 1/500th or slower, you're fine. Want to pull 6 ISO litho film to ISO 1.6 or 0.5? No problem. Just calculate the exposure. The camera doesn't care what, if anything, is inside of it. So think of the H1a as a conspirator that will help you break all manner of photographic rules. And in that regard, the H1a is a very useful and capable artistic tool. And as you can see from the images playing as I speak, this is an amply capable camera. All these images came from 3 rolls on 3 days. Most of them came from 2 trips to the dog park, and the camera delivered. Almost every image on each roll turned out well. Didn't have a light meter, just guessed, and I trusted the camera, and I trusted the film. One thing about these old cameras, and they're all metal construction, they last. And with care and an occasional overhaul, even 50 years later, they can be just as accurate as they were when they left the factory. And so the H1a proves something about photography that you've heard. When it comes to taking a good photo, the 2 things that matter are what's in front of the camera and what's behind it. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content, which is helpful to you guys. If you have any questions about this camera, please leave them below. I'm pretty good about responding fairly quickly. If you have questions about anything photographic or suggestions for other videos, please let me know, and if I have the technical knowledge and the equipment, I will make that video for you. If you'd like to subscribe, then you can find out when I have more videos released about film and digital photography and cameras and techniques and different tips and tricks you can use to improve your photography. Thank you guys for watching.
Sit. Sit. Hannah, sit. Hannah. Hannah, sit. Hannah, sit. Sit. Puppy. Sit. Hannah. Sit. Good girl. Okay, you can lie down. That works too.